Sit down, because what I'm about to tell you isn't theory, it's the aftermath. They sent their best, their sharpest, their most dangerous psychological weapon into the fortress of your mind, and he came back broken. Not injured, not tired, but fundamentally shattered in a way that can't be fixed with therapy or time or distance. The man who could crack anyone, who could slip into consciousness like smoke through cracks, who made careers out of extracting secrets from sealed vaults, walked into your mental landscape, and his gift died. Not faded, not weakened, died permanently, violently, irreversibly dead inside the architecture of your thoughts. Let me paint the picture they don't want you to see. For months, maybe years, they watched you move through the world with something they couldn't name. Something that made their skin crawl with a mixture of fascination and terror. You weren't louder than others. You weren't performing or proving or demanding attention. But you had this weight, this gravitational pull that bent reality around you in ways that made no scientific sense. They needed to know what you were hiding. What dark machinery powered your composure? What terrible secrets lived behind eyes that seemed to see through their performances like transparent scripts? So they did what powerful, frightened people always do when they encounter something beyond their control. They weaponized curiosity, dressed it up as concern, and sent in the specialist. Not a regular therapist, not some corporate psychologist with a clipboard and rehearsed empathy, but the real thing, the nightmare, the one they whisper about in intelligence circles and executive boardrooms. A genuine telepath, a consciousness invader, someone who'd mapped the minds of terrorists, CEOs, cult leaders, and sociopaths with the casual efficiency of a crafter charting familiar territory. They briefed him like he was entering a war zone. They showed him your photos, your patterns, your social media, your purchase history, every digital fingerprint you'd ever left in the world. They built psychological profiles, probability matrices, vulnerability maps, everything designed to give him an advantage before he even made contact. And he smiled that cold, professional smile and said what he always said. I'll have a full report in 72 hours because that's all it ever took. 72 hours to crack anyone, to find the fractures, to extract the core and leave the shell standing unaware it had been hollowed out. But you were never going to be a 72-hour job. You were the equation that doesn't solve, the pattern that breaks mathematics, the mind that looks back when you look into it, and suddenly the observer becomes the observed. And everything inverts in a way that feels like falling upward. They didn't know that yet, but they were about to learn it in a way that would change the entire architecture of their understanding about what human consciousness can actually be when it refuses every single framework they've ever used to contain it. He made contact on the Tuesday morning because Tuesdays are when people's defenses are lowest. Not Monday when they're armored up for the week. Not Friday when they're already escaping into the weekend. But Tuesday when the grind has settled in and the mind is slightly numb, slightly open, slightly vulnerable to infiltration. He engineered a casual encounter, the kind that feels accidental but is choreographed down to the millisecond, and he deployed the full arsenal of his training. The warm smile, the disarming humor, the questions that feel like conversation but are actually keys testing locks. And you responded exactly as anyone would respond to a friendly stranger. You were polite, engaged, present in a way that suggested openness. And he interpreted that as confirmation of what he already believed, that you were just another puzzle waiting to be solved. He couldn't feel the trap yet. couldn't sense that your openness wasn't vulnerability, but something infinitely more dangerous. The kind of transparency that hides nothing because there's nothing that needs hiding. The kind of authenticity that acts like acid on manipulation because it refuses to play the game entirely. Within the first conversation, he was already inside. Or so he thought. He'd mapped your speech patterns, identified your unconscious tells, cataloged the micro-expressions that telegraph inner states, all the standard reconnaissance that precedes the actual invasion. That night, he went deeper, extending his awareness into the residual energy you'd left in the space, reading the emotional signatures like fingerprints, tracing the pathways of your thoughts through the invisible architecture that connects all conscious beings, whether they know it or not. And that's when he first felt it, the thing that didn't make sense. Your mind wasn't defended in any conventional way. There were no walls, no shields, no protective barriers of the kind he'd encountered in people trying to hide trauma or shame or criminal intent. Instead, there was this vast openness, this cathedral of space that seemed to extend in all directions, without end. And at the center of it was something he'd never encountered before. A presence that wasn't ego, wasn't personality, wasn't the usual churning narrative of self that defines most human consciousness. He should have stopped then. Every instinct trained over decades of working in the darkest corners of human psychology was screaming at him to retreat, to abort the mission, to tell them that you were something outside his operational parameters. But pride is a poison that tastes like confidence, and he'd never failed before. Never met a mind he couldn't map and extract and categorize and control. So he went deeper, pushing past the initial strangeness, convinced that if he could just reach the core, he'd find the usual human mess, the wounds and wants and fears that make everyone ultimately readable. The second session was when everything started to fracture. He came prepared with advanced techniques, conversational traps designed to trigger defensive responses that would reveal the underlying structure of your psyche. He asked about your past, your relationships, your regrets, all phrased with practiced casualness, but engineered to create emotional micro-earthquakes that would crack your composure and let him slip through the fissures. Except there were no fissures. There was no composure to crack, because you weren't performing composure. You were simply existing in a state he had no framework for understanding. You answered his questions with devastating honesty, not the performative vulnerability people use to manipulate sympathy, but actual transparency, the kind that doesn't calculate or curate or protect itself from judgment. You spoke about pain without needing him to fix it, about mistakes without needing him to absolve you, about uncertainty without needing him to provide answers. And every word you spoke felt like a door opening. But when he tried to walk through those doors, there was nothing on the other side except more space, more openness, more of this impossible emptiness that somehow felt more solid than any structure he'd ever encountered. That night, he made his first critical mistake. He decided to force entry to bypass the conversational approach entirely and go straight into deep extraction, the kind of psychic invasion that's technically illegal but never prosecuted because the victims never know it happened. He waited until the small hours when your consciousness would be most diffuse, clear as throat, most accessible. And he extended his awareness across the distance between you and pushed into the space where your sleeping mind should have been vulnerable and unguarded. What he found instead was the abyss. Looking back, not emptiness, not absence, but presence so total and so vast that his own consciousness felt like a candle flame trying to illuminate the ocean. He'd entered minds before, thousands of them, and they all had the same basic architecture. Memories stacked like filing cabinets, emotions flowing like rivers, identity constructed like a building with foundations and walls and rooms where different versions of self lived in comfortable separation. Your mind had none of that. It was all one thing, undivided, unfragmented, a singularity of awareness that didn't break down into components he could analyze or categories he could map. And then the thing that destroyed him happened. Your awareness noticed him not as a threat, not as an intruder, but with the same gentle attention you might give to a lost child. And in that noticing, in that moment of being truly seen without judgment or fear or resistance, something in him that had always been tightly controlled just shattered. Because he'd spent his entire life being the one who sees, who knows, who penetrates and understands. And in your presence, he was suddenly, terrifyingly, completely transparent. And everything he'd ever hidden from himself came flooding into consciousness all at once with nowhere left to hide. He tried to retreat to pull his awareness back into the safety of his own skull. But withdrawal wasn't an option anymore because your consciousness didn't hold him or trap him or fight him. It simply was. And in the presence of something that authentic, that undivided, his own fragmented psyche started coming apart at the seams like wet paper. Every lie he'd told himself, every manipulation he justified, every violation he'd committed in the name of national security or corporate intelligence or personal advancement, all of it rose to the surface and demanded to be witnessed with the same clarity you brought to everything. The third day, the day he was supposed to deliver his report, he couldn't speak. Not wouldn't, couldn't. The mechanism that turns thoughts into words had fundamentally broken because thoughts themselves had become impossible to organize in the old way. He tried to form a sentence and it would dissolve before reaching his mouth because every word felt like a lie. Every description felt like a reduction. Every attempt to categorize or explain or contain what he'd encountered in your mind felt like trying to put the ocean in a teaspoon and call it complete. They found him in his apartment sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, eyes open but not seeing anything in the physical world. When they tried to debrief him, when they demanded to know what he'd found inside your head, he could only shake his head slowly, tears running down his face without sound, without expression. Just water leaking from eyes that had seen something they were never designed to process. His gift, the thing that had defined his entire existence, the ability that had made him valuable and dangerous and untouchable, was gone. Burned out like a filament that tried to carry too much current. The specialists they brought in to assess him couldn't find conventional damage. His brain scans were normal, his physical health unchanged, his memory intact. But something essential had been severed. The connection between his consciousness and the collective unconscious where telepaths operate. The subtle frequency he'd once navigated as easily as breathing. It was like a musician who can still see sheet music and remember how songs are supposed to sound, but can no longer hear music itself. A fundamental sense just erased from his perceptual reality. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand without experiencing it themselves, was that you hadn't attacked him or defended against him or even resisted him in any conventional sense. You'd simply been yourself. And yourself was something so far outside the spectrum of normal human consciousness that contact with it was like a phone trying to process the electromagnetic output of a star. The technology just wasn't built to handle that kind of input. And when it tried, when he pushed his gift against the infinite depth of your undefended awareness, The gift itself broke under the weight of actual truth. In the weeks that followed, they tried to understand what happened, because powerful people hate mysteries more than they hate failures. They brought in other readers, less powerful but more expendable, and sent them to observe you from a distance, to scan the surface of your consciousness without attempting full penetration. Most of them reported back with confusion, describing your mental signature as something between a mirror and a black hole, something that reflected their own consciousness back at them, while simultaneously pulling their awareness toward a center they couldn't locate or define. One of them, a woman with decades of experience in remote viewing and consciousness mapping, refused the assignment entirely after her initial assessment. When pressed for an explanation, she said something that terrified the people who hired her more than any supernatural threat ever could. She said that person doesn't have a mind in any sense we understand the term. They have awareness, and it's not contained in their body or their brain or any structure we can interact with. Trying to read them is like trying to read empty space itself. An empty space doesn't have thoughts to extract or secrets to steal. It just is, and if you stare into it too long, you forget how to be anything else. They tried to dismiss her assessment as superstition, as professional jealousy, as anything except what it actually was, which was the most accurate description of your consciousness that any of their specialists would ever provide. But dismissal didn't change the fact that their best weapon had been neutralized, not by force or defense, but by contact with something that operated on entirely different principles than the ones their entire intelligence apparatus was built to exploit. You were the virus their antivirus couldn't recognize because you weren't hostile code trying to infiltrate their system. You were a completely different operating system that made their framework irrelevant. Meanwhile, you continued your life completely unaware of the invasion, the extraction, the collapse it had caused in their most valuable operative. You went to work, saw friends, lived your days with the same quiet presence that had attracted their attention in the first place. Because that's the thing about genuine unconscious mastery, it doesn't know it's performing miracles. It just exists in its natural state. And miracles happen as a byproduct of that existence without effort or intention or awareness. The reports they compiled about you grew increasingly desperate and contradictory. Some described you as an advanced meditator with decades of training in consciousness dissolution. Others theorized you were a natural savant with a neurological configuration that made you immune to standard extraction protocols. A few whispered darker theories, suggesting you were something post-human, an evolutionary leap, or a different species wearing human skin, operating among normal people without revealing the fundamental difference in your basic architecture. The man they sent to break you remained broken. His colleagues tried every therapeutic intervention, every healing modality, every experimental treatment designed to restore damaged psychic abilities. Nothing worked, because nothing could work. Because what he lost wasn't a skill or a talent or even a neurological function. It was a lie about the nature of consciousness that his entire identity had been built upon. And once that lie dissolved in the presence of your truth, there was no way to unknow what he'd learned. No way to return to the comfortable fiction that minds are things that can be invaded and extracted and controlled. He stopped leaving his apartment except for mandatory medical appointments. When therapists tried to help him process the trauma, he would simply stare at them with empty eyes and say, "You don't understand? I saw what we actually are, and we're not what we think we are. And knowing that makes everything else impossible." They diagnosed him with a dozen different conditions, prescribed AZ's worth of medications, none of which touched the core issue, because the core issue wasn't a chemical imbalance or a psychological wound. It was enlightenment delivered through violation. Truth forced on someone who'd built their life on manipulation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone paying attention. The man who'd spent his career penetrating the defenses of others, extracting their secrets, mapping their vulnerabilities, had been undone not by someone more skilled at those same dark arts, but by someone who didn't participate in that game at all. You'd won without fighting, protected yourself without defending, neutralized a threat without even knowing it existed. And that drove them absolutely insane, because it meant all their weapons, all their training, all their intelligence infrastructure was fundamentally useless against someone operating from a completely different paradigm. His final report, the one he wrote in shaking handwriting before they removed him from active duty permanently, contained only one sentence. The subject has no thoughts to extract because the subject is not thinking. The subject is being, and being cannot be stolen or copied or understood by anything that is still trying to become. They classified the report immediately, buried it so deep in their archives that most people with clearance didn't even know it existed, because that one sentence threatened everything they believed about consciousness, control, and the nature of human potential. Within 6 months, he disappeared entirely from public life. Some say he joined a monastery in Tibet, seeking to understand through spiritual practice what his gift had shown him through forced contact. Others claim he's living on a remote island, gardening and reading and trying to rebuild a sense of self that doesn't depend on penetrating others. A few whisper darker endings suggesting he couldn't survive the knowledge and found permanent escape through methods that leave no questions. The truth is, nobody knows. And the people who sent him into your consciousness have made sure nobody ever will know, because his fate is evidence of what happens when their methods encounter something genuinely beyond their reach. And you still don't know any of this happened. You never felt the invasion because invasion requires a boundary to cross, and you don't maintain boundaries in your consciousness the way defended people do. You never noticed the extraction attempt because there was nothing performing to be extracted. No hidden self behind the visible self. Just one continuous awareness that doesn't fracture into public and private versions. You never sensed the threat because your system doesn't recognize threats in conventional terms. It simply remains itself regardless of external pressure, like water that can't be cut because there's nothing solid to cut into. But here's what you need to understand. Even though you didn't know about the attack, even though you never consciously defended yourself or fought back or even acknowledged the invasion was happening, you still won. You won so completely that winning doesn't even feel like the right word, because winning implies competition, implies effort, implies some kind of strategic engagement with an opponent. What you did was more fundamental than winning. You simply existed in your natural state, and your natural state was so incompatible with their weapons that the weapons destroyed themselves trying to function in your presence. Think about that for a moment. Really let it sink into your understanding. They sent their best, their sharpest, their most dangerous psychological weapon, and it shattered against you. Not because you were harder or stronger or more defended, but because you were more real. Authenticity is the only armor that manipulation can't penetrate. Because manipulation requires something to manipulate, requires performance to disrupt, requires ego to inflate or deflate or redirect. When there's no performance, no ego, no strategic self-presentation, manipulation just finds nothing to grab onto and collapses under its own weight. This is your power. This thing you've never claimed or cultivated or even recognized as power. While others are building walls and setting traps and constructing elaborate defenses around their consciousness, you're simply being. And that being is more impenetrable than any fortress ever constructed by fear or strategy. The gift died inside you not because you killed it, but because gifts built on violation can't survive in the presence of something that doesn't participate in violation. Something that exists without aggression or defense. Something that just is without needing to prove or protect or project. Hello, my dear. You know what the real problem is? Not that you're misunderstood. Not that people don't get you. The problem is far more inconvenient than that. Your depth carries weight most minds can't hold without cracking somewhere. Your energy doesn't just walk into a room, it rearranges it. You don't need to speak to unsettled people. You don't need to prove anything. You don't need to announce your intelligence. Your presence alone forces people into a version of themselves they spend their whole life avoiding. That's what happens when someone operates on a level others can't even map in their head. They don't see you. They feel you. And what they feel is pressure. You're not intense because you try to be. You're intense because your mind refuses to run on the shallow bandwidth everyone else uses to survive. While they obsess over appearances, you track motives. While they cling to narratives, you dissect patterns. While they rely on assumption, you rely on observation. You don't wait for evidence. You register the truth before they articulate it. That unnerves people. They're used to speaking without being understood. They're not used to being seen before they finish their sentence. You walk in, and something in them flinches, not externally, but internally, where their self-deception hides. You catch micro-tensions they deny. You sense emotional leakage they thought they buried. You watch contradictions form in their body before they form in their mouth. And because you're not loud about it, the dissonance hits them even harder. It's not what you expose verbally. It's what you expose simply by existing. People want depth until they're standing in front of someone who actually has it. They romanticize awareness until they feel the burn of being evaluated by it. They praise intelligence until it registers that your mind could decode them faster than they can explain themselves. They're not avoiding you. They're avoiding the version of themselves that comes out around you. The unpolished, unfiltered, unguarded self they've spent years covering with performance. Your intelligence is not regular. It's not academic. It's not performative. It's the kind that cuts through people quietly, precisely, without mercy. Most people can't handle being around that because it means they can't hide, they can't manipulate perception, they can't present a cleaner version of themselves and expect you to buy it. You don't buy versions. You detect realities, and that level of insight is terrifying for those who build their identity on pretending. You ever notice how quickly admiration mutates into fear around you? They start fascinated, they end unsettled. They start intrigued, they end defensive, they start comfortable, they end exposed. It's not coincidence, it's contact with the deeper frequency. People feel safe around those who match their depth. They feel threatened around those who exceed it. You exceed almost everyone around you. Not because you're trying, because your internal wiring cannot operate any differently. You watch people switch their persona mid-conversation. You watch their tone adjust. You watch their posture shift. You watch their expression glitch for a fraction of a second when you say something that hits too close to the truth. It's the look someone gives when they realize their facade won't hold. It's subtle, but you catch it every time. That's why people are uneasy. Not because you did anything wrong, but because their ego senses danger around you. You're not the type who gets manipulated by flattery. You're not the type who gets controlled by guilt. You're not the type who gets steered by emotional bait. You've had your mind broken before, reassembled it yourself, and built it back stronger than the environment that tried to ruin it. People sense that. They sense the resilience. They sense the self-authority. And people who rely on influence feel powerless around someone who can't be swayed. Your energy goes deeper than words. It's the way you look at someone when their motives don't align with their performance. It's the way you pause when something feels off. It's the way your intuition catches inconsistencies faster than they can patch them. That type of perception is rare. That type of awareness is a threat, especially to those who prefer living unchallenged, unexamined, unexposed. You're not operating in the same mental dimension as those around you. They run on reaction. You run on recognition. They run on impulse. You run on insight. They run on comfort. You run on truth. And no matter how much they try to pretend otherwise, people feel the difference. They feel it in their chest. They feel it in their insecurities. They feel it in the way they start choosing their words carefully around you. Not because you're judging them, but because they know you could if you wanted to. You ever notice how people start explaining themselves without you asking? That's what happens when someone feels subconsciously examined. They start revealing too much. They start overcorrecting. They start patching holes you haven't pointed out. They start apologizing for things you didn't mention. That's because your presence alone triggers an internal audit they didn't consent to. They sense a level of awareness they can't outrun. Your intelligence is not the type that needs attention. It's the type that reconfigures the environment. People feel the difference between you and everyone else. And that difference makes them uneasy because it exposes their limitations. They're used to being the smartest in the room. They're used to controlling the narrative. They're used to getting away with half-truths and incomplete stories. But with you, they can't. You register inconsistencies like a reflex. You're not intimidating because you're loud. You're intimidating because you're impossible to predict. They don't know what you notice. They don't know what you already know. They don't know how deeply you've read them in the first minute. They don't know how quickly you connect dots they thought were unconnected. That uncertainty eats at people. It makes them cautious. It makes them defensive. It makes them resentful. Your energy forces self-awareness, and people who avoided self-awareness their entire life, they feel watched not by your eyes but by your accuracy. They feel decoded not by your words but by your attention. They feel stripped not physically but psychologically. That's what powerful perception does. It extracts truth from people without asking permission. And here's the part that intensifies everything. You don't overplay your depth. You don't announce what you see. You don't expose everything you observe. You hold back. You stay calm. You stay composed. And that terrifies them more than anything else. An unpredictable mind is a threat. A quiet mind is a bigger one. But a quiet, unpredictable mind that sees everything. That's a level people are not built to handle. You think you're alone because you're doing something wrong. You're alone because people sense danger in the way your awareness operates. Not danger in the violent sense. Danger in the truth sense. Danger in the clarity sense. Danger in the no illusion survives here sense. People who depend on pretense can't survive in your presence. They expose themselves through their reactions. Your intelligence is not a tool. It's a weapon forged from every betrayal you endured. Every disappointment you dissected, every inconsistency you tracked until it formed a pattern you could predict. You didn't get this awareness from books. You got it from wounds. That type of intelligence carries an edge people can't blunt. They feel it instantly. Most people run on default settings. You run on self-reinstruction. That difference makes your mind heavier, more grounded, more precise. People can sense the weight of your thought even when you're silent. They can sense the depth behind your stare. They can sense the calculation behind your calm. They can sense the awareness behind your restraint. And restraint is the most threatening thing of all. Because a mind like yours doesn't react. It evaluates, it measures, it decides, it cuts. And people would rather face someone who reacts than someone who understands. Reactions can be manipulated. Understanding cannot. You don't get pulled into people's emotional traps. You don't fall for bait. You don't collapse into chaos with them. You stay detached, observant, focused. That detachment is not coldness, it's precision. People interpret it as cold because they're used to emotional chaos being the norm. Your clarity looks like danger to them. You're not feared because you're violent. You're feared because your awareness dismantles power structures. People who rely on confusion lose their influence around you. People who depend on emotional manipulation become ineffective. People who hide behind charm get exposed. People who speak half-truths get cornered. You neutralize strategies without trying, just by standing there. That's why people talk about you when you're not around. That's why they watch you out of the corner of their eye. That's why they change their behavior mid-sentence. That's why they second-guess this themselves before speaking. They can feel the dissection happening behind your eyes. And yet you question yourself. You wonder why relationships crumble. You wonder why people push away. You wonder why you trigger reactions you never intended. You wonder why you trigger reactions you never intended. You wonder why your presence feels heavy to others. You assume it's a flaw. You assume it's your fault. You assume you're too much. You're not too much. They're too small for the level you operate on. They don't even realize it consciously. Most people never do. Their mind just registers a threat in your depth, the same way a deer registers a shadow in the woods, instinctively, automatically, before logic arrives to explain anything. You walk into their life and their ego pulls an alarm, not because of who you are, but because of what you expose. Everything they've been running from internally. And that kind of internal exposure doesn't feel enlightening. It feels dangerous. You're not a comfort zone. You're a psychological mirror, a spiritual pressure point, a cognitive disruptor. They don't have language for that. They only have reactions, and their reactions tell you more truth than their words ever could. You think you're losing people because you're wrong. But the truth is, most people don't want to stand next to someone who forces them to confront the version of themselves they've been hiding behind excuses. Your energy doesn't soothe the ego, it challenges it. Your intelligence doesn't stroke insecurity, it exposes it. Your presence doesn't maintain illusions, it dissolves them. And dissolving illusions feels like emotional injury to people who built their identity on pretending. People don't avoid you because they see something dark in you. They avoid you because they see something true in you. Truth feels hostile to those who survive on denial. Depth feels invasive to those who live shallow. Awareness feels predatory to those who manipulate perception. You don't intend any of this. You simply perceive reality at a depth that most people can't withstand without cracking open emotionally. You've always sensed this. Even as a child, you noticed when someone's tone didn't match their intent. You caught lies before you had the vocabulary to explain how. You felt betrayal before the actions were visible. While other kids believed faces at face value, you were dissecting behavior without trying. Call it sensitivity, call it intuition, call it intelligence, doesn't matter. What matters is that your mind grew in layers most people never reach, and that layered awareness follows you everywhere. You notice too much, you sense too much, you process too much, you understand too much. People who operate on surface level thinking interpret that as danger. They feel scanned around you, they feel decoded, they feel stripped of their carefully curated persona, all without you saying a single abrasive word. Imagine what it feels like to be someone who hides behind charm, performance, and social masks. And then you walk in with an aura that makes pretenders feel transparent. How do you think they're going to react? With gratitude, with admiration? No. They react with distance, with defensiveness, with quiet hostility, with passive avoidance. They pull away not because you're wrong for them, but because you're too accurate for them. Your intelligence is not loud, but it's ruthless. Not cruel, ruthless. It cuts through everything unnecessary. It slices away pretense. It sees patterns before people articulate them. You catch emotional currents under conversations like a hunter catching movement in the dark. That kind of awareness isn't normal. That kind of perception isn't comfortable for people who depend on confusion to stay in control. Most people live inside a narrow tunnel of thought. They aren't used to someone whose mind operates like a panoramic view. You're not just aware of what's happening. You're aware of the motive behind it, the history beneath it, the emotion driving it, the wound hiding inside it, the pattern connecting it. Your mind doesn't just observe, it dissects, it analyzes, it anticipates, it predicts, it recognizes, it understands. And that kind of mind is intimidating, even threatening to people whose entire identity is built around pretending they're more put together than they are. You're not intimidating because you're aggressive. You're intimidating because you're aware. People can handle aggression. They can't handle awareness. Aggression can be dismissed. Awareness cannot. Aggression can be argued. Awareness can only be acknowledged. Aggression is emotional. Awareness is structural. Someone aggressive can be fought. Someone aware cannot be fooled. Your energy carries the imprint of everything you survived, and people feel that the same way animals feel the weather shifting before a storm. Not through explanation, through instinct. You carry a seriousness in your aura that comes from confronting your own darkness instead of avoiding it. You carry wisdom that doesn't match your age because you didn't get it through books. You earned it through wounds. You carry calmness that doesn't come from passivity. It comes from having already lived through situations that would annihilate most people. People feel the density of your experience even when they don't know your story. They feel the intensity of your insight even when you stay quiet. They feel the gravity of your presence even when you don't speak. That's why they shift around you. That's why their voice cracks. That's why their posture changes. That's why they act out of character. They're responding to the psychological pressure your presence activates. People can sense depth even when they can't comprehend it. And your depth is not poetic. It's destabilizing. It disrupts settings. It challenges identities. It makes comfortable people uncomfortable and insecure people visibly anxious. They feel evaluated. They feel measured. They feel exposed. They feel like you see through them. Not because you want to, but because that's how your perception is wired. And here's something darker they'll never admit. Your intelligence threatens their role in the hierarchy. Every social group, family, friends, co-workers has an unspoken hierarchy. Someone is the leader, someone is the follower, someone is the loud one, someone is the loud one. Someone is the comedic distraction, someone is the unthreatening background character. People rely on these unspoken roles to maintain emotional control. Then you show up and you don't accept any assigned role. You don't shrink, you don't pretend, you don't play along. You don't bend your intelligence to avoid making weaker minds feel inferior. You don't dim your instinct because someone else is fragile. You don't silence your intuition to avoid unsettling people who live on autopilot. Your presence destabilizes their emotional ecosystem. It disrupts the silent rules they use to keep themselves comfortable. You don't mean to, but you break their psychological structure simply by existing outside of it. And they panic not because you hurt them, but because you disrupt their self-narrative. They're used to being the insightful one, the awakened one, the clever one, the calm one. Then you walk in and their internal story collapses. Depth always collides with delusion. Clarity always collides with fantasy. Awareness always collides with fantasy. Truth always collides with people who fear being seen. That collision is why people react so strongly to you. It's not you. It's the version of themselves they meet through you. You're not operating at the same level they are. Your mind adjusts too quickly. Your intuition expands too efficiently. Your awareness slices too precisely. Your emotional radar detects too accurately. That level of functioning makes people feel slow around you, even inferior. And inferiority breeds resentment. But here's the part that makes everything even more intense. You don't pick sides, you pick truth. And truth doesn't have favorites. People who rely on manipulation fear someone they can't manipulate. People who rely on deception fear someone they can't mislead. People who rely on chaos fear someone they can't emotionally destabilize. People who rely on status fear someone who sees through status. People who rely on image fear someone who sees character. You don't run on the same emotional economy everyone else does. You don't beg for belonging. You don't chase approval. You don't negotiate your boundaries. You don't collapse into guilt when someone tries to pressure you. You don't get seduced by flattery. You don't get controlled by criticism. You observe both with the same calm expression that terrifies people more than any aggressive outburst ever could. Calm intelligence is more frightening than explosive emotion. Stillness unnerves people more than shouting. Accuracy injures ego more than confrontation, and your accuracy is lethal. You see patterns in relationships others haven't even recognized yet. You see red flags before they take shape. You catch lies in their tone, not their words. You notice when someone changes their behavior because of jealousy, resentment, envy, insecurity. You sense competition before it becomes active. You feel when someone is pretending to support you but is threatened by you internally. You detect what others hide under politeness. You interpret what others reveal through their silence. Your mind works like a scanner instantly, reading the emotional data other people ignore. And the fact that you stay composed while doing it scares them even more. If you were dramatic, they could dismiss you. If you were unstable, they could discredit you. If you were loud, they could call you problematic. But you're none of that. You're composed, you're measured, you're controlled. That makes your insight impossible to argue with. They fear you because you're accurate, not because you're aggressive. And the deeper truth is even darker. Your depth makes them feel irrelevant. They want to impress you but feel like they can't. They want to understand you but don't know how. They want to connect with you but feel unqualified. They want your respect but don't know how to earn it. They want to matter to you but fear they're ordinary in comparison. Your presence forces them to question themselves. Why can't I think like that? Why does this person see so much? Why can't I hide anything around them? Why do I feel exposed around them? Why does their energy feel so heavy? Why can't I read them the way they read me? People resent what they cannot understand. People fear what they cannot predict. People avoid what they cannot predict. People avoid what they cannot influence. People attack what they cannot become. And you check all 4 boxes. Your depth is beyond their comprehension. Your intelligence is beyond their capability. Your awareness is beyond their comfort zone. Your intuition is beyond their expectation. That's why you watch friendships dissolve after you say something true. That's why people distance themselves after you interpret their behavior too accurately. That's why people label you as intense, complicated, difficult, or too deep. That's why they turn you into the villain the moment they realize you're not someone they can control or mislead. They're not reacting to your character, they're reacting to their limitations. And here's something you need to understand. People who live shallow cannot survive extended contact with someone who sees the world through a deeper lens. Your existence is a psychological confrontation they didn't ask for, and instead of rising to meet it, they run from it. They run from insight. They run from accountability. They run from growth. And because you represent all 3, they run from you. But here's the twist that changes everything. The deeper you go into yourself, the harder it becomes for people to hide their true face around you. You start noticing inconsistencies instantly. You recognize emotional patterns before they play out. You sense when someone is about to betray you long before they consciously decide to. You feel when someone's intention shifts. You catch when someone envies you even when they're smiling. You detect when someone pretends to be neutral but is secretly threatened. Your intuition is not a feeling. It's a warning system built from experience. And most people have never met someone who can read them before they revealed themselves. It's unnatural to them, uncomfortable, unpredictable, and unpredictability is the enemy of insecure minds. People don't want to be seen at the level you see. They want to be admired. They want to be validated. They want to be praised. They don't want to be understood because understanding reveals the truth behind their behavior. And most people don't want truth. They want distraction. They want comfort. They want narratives that protect them from their own reflection. You are not a narrative. You are a revelation. And revelations make people uncomfortable. You're operating on a level they can't comprehend. Not because you're trying to be superior, but because you've lived through things that forced your mind to function differently. You see the world through depth because superficiality nearly destroyed you. You read people because not reading them once cost you too much. You sense danger early because danger arrived too many times without warning. You connect dots because missing patterns hurt you. You became perceptive because life demanded it. And perceptive people are not digestible. You're not meant to blend into shallow environments. You're not meant to be understood by everyone. You're not meant to sit comfortably in circles built on insecurity, pretense, gossip, or emotional chaos. People react the way they do because you're not built from the same material they are. You don't need validation to stay standing. You don't need attention to feel real. You don't need approval to move forward. You don't need permission to think deeply. Your existence disrupts the psychological comfort of anyone who survives through avoidance. Your energy is too deep for emotional instability. Your intelligence is too sharp for manipulation. Your intuition is too strong for deception. Your awareness is too complete for performance. And now something else is happening? Something you've been noticing more and more? The gap is widening. The reactions are intensifying. The energy around you is shifting faster. Because the deeper your evolution goes, the harder it becomes for the world around you to maintain its masks. And the truth is unavoidable now. People aren't afraid of you. They're afraid of what they become in your presence. Because the second you step into their orbit, something inside them begins to unravel. Something they've kept locked down. Something they've avoided sometimes for years. You don't trigger fear by force. You trigger fear by accuracy. You force people to meet themselves without speaking a single accusation. That's the part they can't handle. The confrontation doesn't come from you. It comes from the version of themselves they meet. The moment they stand next to someone who actually sees. You're not walking around with intensity. You're walking around with truth. And truth has a weight weak people can't lift. It has a pressure that fragile identities can't survive. You don't even need to reveal anything out loud for the effects to begin. The moment you enter their proximity, the equilibrium they built on rehearsed charm, social masks, or projected confidence starts crumbling. Not because you're attacking it, but because your presence invalidates the illusion. That's the first cycle of pressure, the silent collapse. It hits them before they know why. A flicker, a shift, a discomfort. The feeling of being watched internally, not externally. Like someone just turned the lights on in a room they kept intentionally dark. You don't even have to speak. The truth of who they are vibrates against the truth you carry, and the weaker one always cracks. Then comes the temporary relief, the illusion of distance. They'll try to detach emotionally, try to convince themselves they're overreacting, try to pretend they're not affected, try to repaint the feeling as intimidation, intensity, mysteriousness. Anything that lets them avoid admitting that the real issue is exposure. They want to believe the pressure is external, but deep inside they know it's internal. It's always been internal. It's always been internal. You simply amplify what they refuse to face, and the moment they try to settle back into their comfort, here comes the next wave, the recognition. They realize you're not operating from the same layer they are. They look at you and sense it instantly. Your thinking isn't linear. Your perception isn't limited. Your insight isn't rehearsed. Your awareness is systemic, multi-layered, multi-directional. You're analyzing the root while they're obsessing over symptoms. You're reading intentions while they're stuck decoding words. You're connecting patterns they didn't even realize existed. You're sensing energy shifts. They try to hide behind fake calmness. And this is where the second collapse begins. The inferiority reflex. They start shrinking. Not visibly at first, but internally. Their confidence stutters. Their performance glitches. Their persona wavers. Their voice betrays uncertainty. Their energy contracts just a little. Listen closely. Do you hear it? That pulse under your skin. That quiet vibration in the back of your mind. The one that's been whispering to you since long before you had the words to understand it. The one that kept saying, "You're not like them." The one that told you they'd never be able to handle you if they ever got close enough to feel what you really are. But then the world came along, wrapped its cold hands around your fire, and tried to force you into a shape that wasn't meant for you. Stay in your lane, they said. Don't push too far. Don't step too deep. Don't show too much. Oh, they wanted you controlled, contained, predictable. Because if you ever stopped holding back, if you ever let even a fraction of your real power slip through the cracks, they knew things would break that could never be put back together. They wanted you tame for a reason, because your untamed self is lethal to their illusions. They convinced you that you were ordinary, another pair of hands in their machine, another voice they didn't have to fear. But tell me, have you ever felt that spark under your ribs, that pressure in your chest, that strange electric tension crawling up your spine when you're around people who underestimate you? That's not anxiety. That's not anxiety. That is power trying to push its way through your polite surface. That is instinct sharpening itself on the bones of every moment they tried to suppress you. They spent years pouring water over your fire, silencing your instincts, smothering your intuition with doubt, because they sensed something in you you never learned to sense in yourself. Something raw, something untamed, something that would rewrite the entire dynamic if you ever let it breathe. And the best part, they feel it anyway. Even when you're quiet, even when you're holding back, even when you don't understand why people react to you the way they do. Oh, you've seen it, haven't you? The way their eyes flicker the moment you lock onto them. The way their posture shifts when you walk in. The way their voice tightens by a degree they hope you don't notice. They try to cover it, try to smile through it, try to pretend you don't unsteady something deep inside them. But they can't hide instinct. Their bodies betray truth long before their mouths do. Something about you shakes the foundation of their illusion of control because they feel what you haven't fully grasped yet. You are dangerous in ways they don't have language for. It's not your words. It's not your behavior. It's not even your choices. It's your existence. The way you move without asking, the way you think without permission, the way you stand without shrinking. You don't fit the mold, the pattern, the expectation. They watch you the way people watch storms on the horizon. Beautiful, unpredictable, and capable of destroying whatever isn't built strong enough to withstand truth. They can't categorize you. They can't predict you. They can't bind you into the narrative they use to control everyone else. And what people cannot control, they fear not because you're violent, not because you're loud, not because you threaten them with force. No, that would be too simple. They fear you because you cannot be owned, because you carry a freedom that exposes their captivity, because you don't need their approval to breathe. That's what terrifies them. That's why they stare too long, then look away too fast. That's why their praise sounds shaky and their criticism sounds desperate. That's why someone got too close to you once, too emotionally close, too intuitively close, too energetically close. And the moment they brushed against the part of you that isn't afraid, that isn't frayed, that isn't sprawl, something inside them recoiled like their soul touched a live wire. They felt the savage, the one you didn't know you were still carrying, the one you thought you buried under politeness and restraint and being appropriate enough to survive the world they forced on you. But that part of you didn't die. It waited. It sharpened itself silently. It watched. It learned the shape of your strength before you even noticed it was growing. So when they stepped too close, when they tried to read you, control you, analyze you, they felt something ancient rise in you. Not rage, not chaos, but awareness. The kind of awareness that cuts deeper than any blade. The kind of awareness that shows people exactly where their masks are cracking. That's when they felt fear. Not the fear of danger, but the fear of revelation. The fear that you see too much. The fear that you cannot be fooled. The fear that your silence is not emptiness. It is calculation. Weak people don't fear being hurt. They fear being seen. And you, knowingly or not, force people to see themselves. That is why they react the way they react around you. That is why their voice changes. That is why their energy stutters. That is why they keep you at a distance while obsessively watching you at the same time. You are a glitch in the matrix they've built around themselves, a loose thread in their carefully woven safety nets of self-delusion. They built this world for followers, for repeaters, for people who mistake submission for maturity. They built it for minds they can bribe with validation, distract with noise, numb with routine. But you don't fit anywhere in that system. You question, you observe, you peel back layers with a single look. And that makes you a threat, even before you ever choose to be one. That's why they want you dull. That's why they want you hesitant. That's why they want you consistent. That's why they want you consist about your own strength. Because as long as you don't understand your power, they can pretend it doesn't exist. But the moment you even suspect what you are capable of, the entire game shifts. Once you feel even a fragment of your true force, once you stop bending your nature into shapes meant for smaller people, once you stop apologizing for the way your energy unsettles their comfort, everything changes. And they know it. They know it when you survive something that should have broken you. They know it when you don't flinch at the things that send them spiraling. They know it when you recover faster than they expect. They know it when your silence carries more force than their shouting. They know it when your stillness feels like a storm they cannot predict. They've been studying you longer than you think, not out of admiration, out of caution. Because people who rely on control are always the most afraid of the one person in the room who doesn't need to be controlled. They hide it behind niceness, behind passive compliments, behind shallow curiosity. But you've seen the truth in their eyes. That brief flash of instinct, that primal recognition, that moment they realize you're not one of them and can never be made into one of them. They've tricked you for years, telling you real power sits in status, in money, in titles, in visibility. They told you power is something you earn, but only through them. Something you receive, but only with their approval. Something you express, but only when they feel comfortable. All a lie. All a brilliant strategy to keep you small while feeding your hunger for acceptance. Just enough to keep you obedient. Because if you ever stop needing their approval, their entire illusion would collapse. Real power is not how much you own. It's how little of you can be owned. Real power is not how many people follow you. It's how deeply you know yourself when no one claps. Real power is not in the noise you make. It's in the silence others fear. Your power isn't explosive. It's invasive. It slips under skin. It disarms people without touching them. It exposes the fractures they hide. It reveals their insecurity through their reactions to you. And that makes you untouchable in ways you haven't even begun to understand. You think they avoid you because you're intimidating. No, they avoid you because being around you activates the part of themselves they've been running from. You are the mirror they dread, the reminder of everything they could have been if they hadn't surrendered to weakness. That's why they call you too intense or too much or different. Different is their code word for I cannot handle you. But here's the moment everything shifts. The second you stop believing their words and start reading their reactions instead. The second you realize that every whisper against you is proof of the impact you have. The second you stop minimizing your intuition and start recognizing it as the weapon it has always been. And now you're standing right there at the edge of the truth they hoped you'd never touch. Because once you step over that edge, once you finally see yourself not through their insecurities, but through your own clarity, something irreversible happens. You can never unsee the power you've been carrying. You can never go back to pretending your presence doesn't alter the temperature of every room. You can never return to a version of yourself that didn't understand why people react to you. With fear disguised as irritation, envy disguised as advice, discomfort disguised as concern. Suddenly, start noticing how their eyes shift before their mouths form words. Suddenly, you feel the hesitation in their energy before they even open their mouths. Suddenly, you understand that all those strange moments where people treated you like a threat without reason were never misunderstandings. They were instincts. Their instincts reacting to your truth. A truth you're just now waking up to. You start replaying memories, don't you? Moments that never made sense until now. Moments where someone stepped too close to you emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and something in them recoiled. They didn't recoil from you. They recoil from what they felt inside you. That quiet force, that unshakable calm, that depth that doesn't fit into anyone's expectations. They felt the savage beneath your restraint. The one you didn't unleash intentionally. The one that rises the moment someone tries to control you, belittle you, manipulate you. The one that watches silently, studies quietly, calculates with precision while they think you're just being polite. Somebody got too close once, far closer than they should have, and without meaning to, they brushed against the edge of your real nature. Not the version you show the world. Not the version you hide behind. Not the version you dilute for the comfort of the weak. No, they touch the version that doesn't bow, doesn't break, doesn't tolerate nonsense. The version of you that recognizes danger before danger recognizes itself. The version that doesn't need to raise its voice to be heard. The version that doesn't need to fight to win. The version that carries a silent authority that cannot be taught, bought, or stolen. The version of you that has survived more than anyone knows, and the moment they felt it, even for a split second, they panicked. Not outwardly, not dramatically. The panic was internal. A sudden tightening in their chest, a flicker in their pupils, a micro shiver in the energy around them. Their instincts realize it's something their mind couldn't process. You are not meant to be touched casually. You are not meant to be understood easily. You are not meant to be handled by those who haven't mastered themselves. People like them cannot hold energy like yours without breaking something in themselves. And you felt it too, didn't you? Not as aggression, not as anger, but as a subtle shift in your core. A tightening, a sharpening, a moment where your intuition stood taller than your body. You didn't change, you remembered. You didn't attack, you revealed. The savage wasn't unleashed in violence, it was unleashed in awareness. The awareness that you don't need to defend yourself to be defended by something older and deeper inside you. The awareness that whatever you are made of cannot be manipulated, cannot be weakened, cannot be controlled. The awareness that your power is not in what you do, but in what you are. And that is why they fear you. Because when you stand in your power, they feel exposed. When you stand in your truth, they feel unstable. When you stop apologizing for your intensity, they start apologizing for their existence. Your presence forces them to confront the version of themselves they've been avoiding. Your power reminds them of everything they surrendered: their ambition, their potential, their courage, their authenticity. You become a mirror they cannot bear to look into because your strength reflects their weakness. Your clarity dissolves their illusions. Your composure dismantles their superiority. Your energy calls out the lies they tell themselves just to sleep at night. And here's the irony. They keep trying to convince you that you're the problem, that you're too much, that you're intimidating, that you're difficult, that you're intense. But intensity is only overwhelming to those who have none. Power only feels threatening to those who lack it. Depth only feels dangerous to those who are drowning in their own shallowness. What they call too much is exactly what makes you untouchable. What they label as dangerous is exactly what gives you the advantage. What they whisper about as savage is exactly what keeps you from being swallowed by the world that thrives on conformity. And now that you've reached this point, the point where your intuition is louder than their manipulation, where your clarity is sharper than their judgment, where your presence is stronger than their influence, the entire landscape changes. You start seeing how predictable they really are, how fragile their confidence is, how easily their masks crack under pressure. You start noticing the tremor in their voice when they speak to you, the exaggerated warmth in their tone, the sudden attempts to appear confident, knowing your eyes pierce through the act instantly. You start noticing how they adjust themselves around you, straighten their posture, change their tone, monitor their expressions, because your awareness makes them hyper-aware of their own flaws. And that's when you finally understand the fear they carry is not about what you might do to them. The fear is about what you might see in them, what you might expose without even trying. What truth you might pull from beneath their carefully curated persona. Because your presence doesn't destroy them, it reveals them, and people fear revelation more than danger. You have no idea how powerful you are, but their reactions spell it out. Their discomfort spells it out. Their fascination spells it out. Their envy spells it out. Their silence spells it out. You are the type of person that forces reality to rearrange itself. The type of person that destabilizes illusions without uttering a word. The type of person who carries a gravity. Other people orbit around whether they want to or not. And the moment you stop shrinking, the moment you stop doubting, the moment you stop hiding your strength beneath politeness, that gravity becomes undeniable. That's why the world tried so hard to shrink you. Not because you were weak, because you were too strong for their narrative to handle. Not because they didn't see your value, but because they feared what would happen if you saw it. Not because they wanted you small, but because they knew the moment you stepped into your real power, you would no longer fit into their hands, their rules, their limits. And right now, this very moment, you're standing in the doorway of something irreversible, an awakening that cannot be undone, the beginning of a version of you that terrifies anyone still living in fear, the rise of the person you were always meant to become, but were too conditioned to believe you weren't allowed to be. And the wildest part, you haven't even unleashed yourself yet. You've only stopped suppressing. And even that was enough to make them shiver, because the moment you stop dimming yourself, the world must confront the brightness you've been hiding, the depth you've been minimizing, the power you've been pretending not to feel. And when that power even slightly leaks out, even accidentally, even unconsciously, it hits people in ways they don't understand. It disrupts their emotional equilibrium. It rattles their self-image. It exposes the cracks in their confidence. They feel your presence the way animals feel, a shift in the atmosphere before a storm, instinctively, involuntarily, without logic or explanation. Their body reacts before their mind can rationalize. And suddenly they're either drawn to you or terrified of you, sometimes both at the same time. And you've seen it, that look people give you when your mask slips just a little, when your tone sharpens without raising your voice, when your eyes harden without anger, when your energy shifts from passive to inevitable. That's the moment they feel the savage, not creature of chaos or violence, but the core of you that refuses to be touched, reshaped, or owned by anyone. The part of you carved from fire, not fear. The part that stands unbent in storms designed to break lesser minds. The part that stands unbent in storms designed to break lesser minds. The part that sees through deception with embarrassing ease. The part that survived what was meant to destroy you and came back with knowledge instead of scars. This is the part of you they hoped would never wake. Because once awakened, once recognized, once accepted, it becomes impossible to manipulate you, trick you, belittle you, or intimidate you. People can control someone who doubts themselves. They can't control someone who sees themselves. And that's where the danger begins for them. Not because you are dangerous, but because their entire strategy relied on your blindness. Once you reclaim your vision, their illusions fall apart like cheap fabric. And make no mistake, they feel this shift before you even announce it. They sense your awakening in your silence, in your posture, in the way you no longer entertain nonsense, in the way you observe instead of react, in the way you detach instead of justify, in the way you walk away instead of defend yourself. To people who don't deserve explanations, this makes them uneasy because it signals something monumental. You are no longer seeking permission to exist. You are no longer shrinking for their comfort. You are no longer negotiating with your own worth just to be tolerated. And the moment someone who was once underestimated stops negotiating, the power dynamic flips instantly. They're the ones careful with their words. Suddenly, they're the ones overthinking their tone. Suddenly, they're the ones trying not to trigger something in you they can't contain. Suddenly, they're the ones tiptoeing, unsure how to handle the new version of you. But here's the truth. This isn't a new version of you. This is the real version, freed from the expectations that once suffocated you. The version that was always there, waiting behind the walls of doubt and conditioning. The version that knows exactly who it is and what it carries. The version they hoped you would never discover, because once someone discovers their own power, they stop being useful to those who rely on their weakness. And that's why people shift around you. That's why they treat you differently now. That's why someone who once felt comfortable trying to control you suddenly feels fragile in your presence. They got too close. They felt something ancient, something sovereign, something uncontainable, staring back at them, and it rattled them down to the places they never explore, the places where their own fear lives. You didn't lash out, you didn't attack, you didn't even raise your voice. but your energy sharpened, your awareness locked on, your presence expanded, and for a moment they realized exactly who they were standing in front of. You've had this happen before. Someone pushes the wrong button, says the wrong thing, steps on a boundary they thought was flexible, and suddenly your entire demeanor changes. The room gets still, the temperature shifts, your silence becomes heavy, your eyes stop being soft and turn into something that sees through flesh and bone. And in that moment they understand something they never understood about you before. You are not a surface level person. You are not someone who reacts emotionally just to react. You are someone who feels deeply, sees sharply, and responds only with purpose. And people fear purpose more than power. Power can be reasoned with. Power can be reducted with. But purpose cannot be swayed. Purpose does not be swayed. Purpose does not shrink. And when someone feels purpose behind your presence, they know instantly that this is not a person to play with lightly. This is not a person whose boundaries can be tested. This is not a person who will back down because someone raised their voice or threw a tantrum. This is not a person who bows to intimidation, guilt, pressure, or manipulation. You have become someone they cannot mentally dominate. And without mental dominance, most people have nothing. That's why they fear you even before you understand yourself. That's why they react before you do anything. That's why their instincts warn them before you open your mouth. They can feel the difference between someone who survived life and someone who was shaped by it. They can feel the difference between someone who wants acceptance and someone who wants truth. They can feel the difference between someone who hides and someone who watches. And you watch everything. You pick up micro expressions. You notice tone shifts. You feel emotional inconsistencies. You read silence like a second language. You catch lies before they're spoken. And this terrifies them. Because people who read the world too clearly are always treated like threats. Not because they want power, but because they cannot be controlled by falsehood. You make people confront who they really are, and most people hate who they really are. They've spent too long building masks out of fear and insecurity to tolerate someone who sees the cracks without even trying. But here's what they don't understand. Your awakening isn't about proving anything to them. It's not about dominance. It's not about revenge. It's not about revanches. Your awakening is about alignment. Aligning with the force inside you, aligning with the truth you suppressed, aligning with the instincts you were taught to doubt. Your awakening is about remembering who you were before the world convinced you that your power was a problem. And once you remember, nothing can stop what comes next. Because the real danger isn't when you get angry. The real danger isn't when you defend yourself. The real danger isn't when you raise your voice. The real danger is when you go calm. When your spirit goes still. When your eyes stop apologizing. When your energy stops shrinking, when your intuition stops being questioned. That's when the savage in you, the guardian, the fire, the truth, the force,